Hi, everyone. My name's Anthony Ruggiano, and in 1988, I was struggling with addiction, and I went into a treatment center. I set up a helpline number, which is 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. That number, phones will be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're struggling with addiction, or you know someone that is struggling with addiction, please call that number and let me help. I will be hands-on. I will be personally involved in the person's recovery. They will meet me. They will spend time with me, and I will help them live a life beyond their wildest dreams. So please, if you know anybody that has a problem with addiction, or you yourself have a problem with addiction, please call that number and let me help. And also help their family members or friends. Please call that number, 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. So he was in the street, and a couple of his good friends fathers were mobbed up, and their uncles were mobbed up, and one of them was in Murders Incorporated, Happy Mayoni, Lenny the donor, who was Jenny Mayoni's son, who actually was my godfather, was one of my father's best friends, and Tony Lee Guerreri, whose uncle Willie was a wise guy with the Genovese family. So he was always around the mob, and went from there. Then he got in trouble. He became a teenager. He got in trouble. He went into this. He got drafted during the war. And like I said on other shows, he went to boot camp, and there was a sergeant there, a drill sergeant, a Southerner, and he kept on picking on him, calling him racial names, Guinea, WAP, all that, stuff of that nature. And my father wound up hurting him, and he went AWOL, and he got arrested in Brooklyn. He surrendered, actually. He surrendered, and he went away. He went to Leavenworth. He got out. He was only home 6 months. He got rearrested again. He went back to prison. He went to Sing Sing, and he met Chrissy Ticker there, who later on became the underboss of the Lucchese family. He became very good friends with Chrissy Ticker and Carmine Lambendoza, who later became a captain in the Genovese family. So he knew all these people, and like I said earlier, he got out. He hooked up with Charlie Wagons. He did some work for Albert Anastasia, and then lo and behold, in 1953, I was born, and that's the same year he got straightened out. And he used to like to say that that was the best year of his life. He became a father and a wise guy in the same year. And I didn't know what my father did for a living when I was a kid. I knew something was different from when I used to go by my friends' houses and even my cousins' houses. They would get tucked in by their mothers. I wasn't. Their fathers were home a certain time of the day, and mine wasn't. And my father always wore suits and ties. He was always with men. There was always men in and out of my house. He would take me to the bar with him on Saturday, and I had the run of the place. I would run behind the counter bar and play with the soda guns, and people would stick money in my pocket. So I always felt kind of special at a young age because of him. But I didn't know why until I became a teenager. And then I found out he was a wise guy through the older kids in the neighborhood. I would hear the older kids whisper, "That's Fat Andy's son. That's Fat Andy's son." And then I found out who Fat Andy was. And, I was happy about it. It gave me sort of like some kind of rep, I guess. I don't know. And I was doing state time in 95. I got arrested by New York State. I got arrested on a big bookmaking case with Queens. And the Queens DA and the Brooklyn DA was a combined task force. And I got indicted, and I took a plea, and I got a 2-4. And when I was away on that case, I was upstate New York. I got indicted in Miami by the feds for a RICO, for racketeering, for extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, and a whole bunch of charges. And the marshals took me down to Florida, and I took a plea, and I got 10 years. And the judge in Florida ran my sentence concurrent with my state time, so I would get credit for all the time. So I had to go back to New York State to finish my state time, and then they paroled me to the federal detainer, and the marshals took me to federal prison. Once I got to federal prison, the BOP, which is the Bureau of Prisons, wouldn't give me credit for the 14 months I already had in. They said that the judge erred and I wasn't entitled to the time because you couldn't run, you had to run federal time first with the state time. It couldn't be reversed. The state time couldn't come first and they wouldn't give me credit. So I had to fight the case. So in federal prison, the process is first you have to go through the BOP system. So I had to put an appeal in to the warden first and he denied it. Then I had to put it into the region. And then the region denied it. And then I had to put it into DC, to Washington, DC. And then the Washington, DC denied it. Then I had to retain an attorney. So I retained an attorney. Eventually, after years of fighting it, I mean, I fought it for close to almost 3 years. I had a hearing in the Second Circuit Court, which is in Philadelphia, and the Circuit Court ruled in my favor. And because I actually made law for people to get out, that they could do that, that it was legal for the judge to do that. And they gave me the 14 months credit. Before I won the decision, my father was home. He had gotten out of prison. And I called up my father, and my mother answered the phone. I really never spoke about this. And my mother answered the phone and told me that, listen, you better talk to your father because he's dizzy. He got up, he got dizzy, he won't go to the doctor. My father hated doctors. He was very thick-headed, he would never go to doctors. I used to tease him all the time, come on, you're a big gangster, tough guy. You're afraid to go to the doctor? And he used to say, mind your business. He used to tell me, mind your business. So he got on the phone, my father, and I says, Mom, what's the matter? Mommy told me you're dizzy. He goes, yeah, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. He goes, did you talk to the lawyer? He was only concerned about me. He goes, did you talk to the lawyer? Did you talk to Linda? I said, yeah, I spoke to him. He goes, what's going on? So I explained everything to him. And he goes, okay. He goes, keep me posted. I'll call her too. I'll give her a call in a couple of days. I said, all right. And then I said to him, so now what are you going to do? Are you still dizzy? And he said to me, the last words he said to me were, if I'm dizzy tomorrow, I'll go to the doctor. Just stay on top of the lawyer. And I said, all right, fine. And I hung up the phone and I never spoke to him again. That night he passed away. So then I was in Schuylkill, and then all the wise guys, then word got around the prison that he had passed away, and he had a major reputation. And the first person that came running to my building was Sally Avellino, who was a captain in the Lucchese family. He was the driver, Tony Dux's driver. He's a famous wise guy, Sally Avellino. He was the first one to come over and give me his condolences, and then all the other wise guys and captains started coming to see me and giving me their condolences. And then, that was it. That's when the true colors of the mob showed themselves. Well, I shouldn't say that. Let me rephrase that. The true colors of the mob in that era came through because after my father died, they took everything from us. They stopped sending my money. They took everything because the rules are, when a wise guy dies, all the illegal businesses revert to his captain, to the captain of the crew or the boss of the family. And so the boss at the time was Pete Gotti. So everything my father had reverted to Pete. All the illegal stuff and all the legal stuff, the legitimate stuff goes to the immediate family. That's like the unwritten rules. But all my father had at that time was everything was illegal. We had nothing legitimate going. He was working on a few things. He was working on some kind of fruit and vegetable business with some wise guys in Philadelphia, because my father was good friends with Joey Molina, who was the boss of Philadelphia. They were very tight. As a matter of fact, I used to drive to Philly to go see Joey and bring him messages, and he would always call my house up. Joey Molina, he was the boss of the Philadelphia crew at the time. But other than that, we had nothing going that was legitimate. So when my father passed away, they pretty much took everything. I mean, they left me a little something, and they totally stopped sending my mother money. They stopped sending my wife money. I was in prison. They just really didn't do the right thing, the guys that were still in the street. And that sort of gave me a bit of taste in my mouth, because I knew, and I told a few of them, I knew that if my father would have never done that to anybody. He would have never done that. He would have made sure that the family had an income, because that's who he was. He was an old timer that believed in that. The people that controlled that were like Tony Lee's brother, Mikey Gal, Skinny Dom, Pete Gotti. So when I got out of prison, Nicky Carrazza, who was a captain also, who my father straightened out, had gotten me transferred from that crew to his crew. So, because he liked me and he loved my father. So he got me, when I got out of prison, I was sent for, and they told me that Nikki had me, that I was with Nikki now, and Nikki was going to straighten me out. And Nikki actually proposed me to be made. And I didn't have to deal with them. I didn't have to deal. He pretty much got me away from them because he knew that there was, he knew what happened, and that was his way of helping me. So he got me away from them, and I was with him, and he actually proposed me, and I was just waiting to get straightened out when I got rearrested. My mother's girlfriend was on a date with my godfather, Lenny, the donor, who was Happy Mayone's nephew. And they were in a beach bar on Coney Island on the boardwalk. And my father went there to meet Lenny, who was his best friend. And that's when Lenny introduced him to my mother. And my mother started talking to him. My mother used to tell the story. My father went to the bathroom, to the men's room with Lenny. And my mother asked the bartender, "Who's this jerk that keeps talking to me? Why does this jerk want to keep talking to me?" And the bartender told my mother, "Don't say that about him. Don't let him hear you say that." And then my father came out of the men's room and started talking to her again. And they eventually started dating. She says she didn't know, but how could she not know? I mean, he was on parole, and she knew, but she was, he was not a good husband. I mean, he was he was a street guy. He was a womanizer. He always had girlfriends. I know that. I had a bit of a rough childhood with her. I had some mommy issues. She would. I was the oldest child, so she would drag me around. She was a kid with kids, and I didn't know that until later on in life when I started working on myself. With the 12 steps and all that. That I finally realized that she was just a kid with kids. She was 19 when she had me in '53, and then 18 months later, my brother was born. So now she has a 20-year-old kid with 2 babies, with a wise guy for a husband, and she's dragging me all over Brooklyn, looking in bars. And I remember one time she brought me to this apartment building, and to the day she died, she can't believe I still remembered it, but I do like it was yesterday. And she took me to this building in Brooklyn, and we went up in an elevator, and she rang this doorbell, and this girl answered the door, and she looked at me, and I was a kid. I was maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. And she said to me, "That's your father's girlfriend." And then her and the girl started fighting in the hallway. I mean, rolling on the floor. And I started screaming. I was up against the wall screaming. It was very traumatic. So that was my childhood, with her anyway, so she was always wrapped up in her relationship with him. She was a kid, was always, "Get out of here, leave me alone, go to bed. Not now." She was always on the phone smoking cigarettes with her girlfriend. She was a kid, a teenager. She was a jealous teenager. And, but, every Saturday they went out, every Saturday, I remember they got dressed up. They went to the Copa. They saw all the, Martin and Lou. I mean, they saw everybody. My father was friends with everybody. They saw D. Martin and Jerry Lewis, Nat King Cole. They saw everybody at the Copa. My father was in the Copa every Saturday night with my mom. So because in the mob back then, you went out with your girlfriend on Friday night and your wife on Saturday night. It was like a religion. Friday night was girlfriend night, and Saturday night was wife night. So my mother would get picked up by some guys that were around my father. She would get taken to a restaurant, maybe Peter Luger's or somewhere like that, a restaurant like that. And then they would have dinner, and then they would go to the Copa, or they would go to the Latin Quarters. They would go to some nightclub, because back then in the 50s and 60s, that's where, the shows were, not like today. I remember when they went to see the Supremes, when the Supremes were big in the early 60s. And I was a kid, and I liked the Supremes. And I knew that night they were going to the Copa, and I cried. I wanted to go with them. And my father said, "You're too young. You can't go to the Copa." And I want to go. I said, "I want to see the Supremes." And he wouldn't take me. So, and on Sundays, we always went to my grandmother's house. That was like a religion. His mother, we went to my grandmother's house until she died. And then we went, after she passed away, we'd go by my aunt's. Always on Sundays, we went by a member of my father's family. We always went to a member of my father's family most of the time, until my father moved to Florida. So yeah, so she says she didn't know, but she knew. You know, that there was always meetings in my house. My father was getting arrested. Even my mother and I even got subpoenaed once when I was about 18 or 17 or 18. My father was there was a grand jury in Brooklyn about him, about Shylocking and bookmaking, and they actually subpoenaed me and my mother. They subpoenaed my mother in the grocery store, right at the cash register. They walked in and handed her a subpoena. They subpoenaed me coming out of my house. She used to follow me around the neighborhood. She was more worried about me going on heroin, because back then in the 60s, I never took heroin. I stood away from it, but everybody was shooting heroin and she was just more concerned about me fooling around with drugs and she used to follow me around, catch me playing hooky, but they never really forced me to do anything, like go back to school, or she, as a matter of fact, signed me out. She actually signed me out of school when I was 16 and got suspended. She's the one that went up to school and signed the papers for me to drop out. The only time she got really upset was when I left with the FBI. When I cooperated, I told the government, the FBI, just that I needed to go see my sister and my mother, and I needed to tell them what happened. And I went to my mother's house, and I told my mother, what happened. And she just looked at me kind of sad, and she just looked at me and she shook her head and she said to me, I can't believe your father made you do things like that. And he didn't make me, we did them together. Neil Delacroce, I met guys like that. I never met any of them old time famous guys. My father met them. My father actually got picked up for shooting Frank Costello, because when Frank Costello got shot in the hallway, the description of the shooter was a short, stocky guy that walked side to side. And back then, my father used to tell me that anytime there was a mob hit in the city, they would always pick him up and put him in a lineup. And he was just one of the main suspects, because he was around, Albert Anastasia. And when Frank Costello got shot, he actually was picked up, my father, by the homicide detectives. And they actually brought him to the hallway and made him run up and down the hallway, because to see if he could be identified. I don't know why they did that, but he said they made him run up and down the hallway. And then they took him to the precinct and put him in a lineup, but then they let him go, because in actuality, the chin is the one that shot him. And I always used to tell my father, I used to tell him, "You sure it wasn't you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why? Why wasn't, what do you mean, why? Why wasn't it you?" And he goes, "Because if it was me, he would have been fucking dead. That's why." The fondest memory of my father was he used to pinch my cheek and kiss me on the lips and tell me, my son. He used to call me the "don't worry about it, kid." I used to tell him whatever he told me, I used to tell him, "Don't worry about it." And he used to call me and he used to say, "Here he comes." When I used to walk in his bar, he used to go, "Here he comes, the don't worry about it kid." And then he would pinch my cheek and kiss me on the lips. When I wanted to be a sports writer, I love sports. When I went from Catholic school to public school, back then in the 60s, parochial school was so much more ahead of public school, like way ahead. I mean, so when I was a very poor student in Catholic school, but when I got transferred into public school, I was like one of the smartest kids in the class. When I was in the 6th grade, I got voted the smartest person, and I got the highest scholastical achievement award for being the smartest kid in the class. And then in the 7th grade, I became a truant. I went from one extreme to another. There was no in between for me. I went from one to another. And in the 6th grade, I used to write really good stories. I used to write nice stories. Sports stories about. I used to actually write letters to Mickey Mantle, because he was my idol, and I used to actually write letters to Mickey Mantle and mail them to Yankee Stadium, and I would get back pictures, signed pictures of him, and thank you notes, and not probably from the front office. I'm sure it wasn't really from the Mick, but later on, I did meet him. And in the 7th grade, when I started running around in the street a little bit, and I found out who my father was, and I sort of liked it, and I liked the street life. And then I started hooking up with these kids and started playing hooky and smoking pot. And that was the end of my education. And that was the end of my sports writing dreams. And then I just became a criminal.